when you were saying trauma, it's like, yeah, I haven't met anybody that only has one.
Right.
It's like we all have a bunch of things because things matter to us.
Right.
If it doesn't matter to you, there's not a trauma, but if
That's
it matters to you, it's going to hurt you and it's going to be traumatic.
What I love about one of the things I discovered when I started working with Hollykem, and she was kind of showing me the way she works, and that's what we really integrated in our book. But what we discovered was that we all have our own wounding, or we're all dealing with stress on different levels, and the way we cope with it is different. Now, somebody's coping behavior can lead to become an addiction, and they're sedating life through the addiction. But another person's coping behavior could be through overworking. Another person's can be through unhealthy relationship with food. Another person can be hyper-religiosity. I'm not talking about healthy spirituality or healthy religious practices. And and not all of those fit the category of addiction, but all of them fit the category of coping behaviors that can become self-destructive.
Right.
Yeah. You're listening to When God Intervenes, the podcast where faith, hope, and healing come together for families with a loved one battling addiction. Hi, everybody. I'm Daryl Rogers, your host. Welcome to another episode of When God Intervenes. I'm here today with Dr. Dean and Hollykem Senseri. Dr. Dean Senseri and Hollykem Senseri, co-authors of A Roadmap to the Soul, a practical guide to love, compassion, and inner peace, are seasoned experts in guiding individuals, couples, and families toward healing and purpose. Married since 1991, their dynamic partnership blends over 3 decades of experience in helping people overcome past trauma, break free of self-destructive patterns, and discover a deeper, more meaningful life. Their insightful approach offers both practical wisdom and heartfelt inspiration. Welcome to the show, Dr. Dean and Holly. Good to have you today.
Yeah, it was good to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
I love that introduction. It's hard to believe we're talking about us.
So, and you're in, did you say, not Baton Rouge?
We're in New
Orleans, right?
Yeah,
we're in New Orleans. We have an
Yeah.
office in Baton Rouge. We both have been in the field of mental health, addiction, recovery, life coaching, really 30 plus years. And it really came out of, like so many of us, our own journey and our own story that led us to really embrace and want to help people in the same way that we were helped. And so, we've been married 33 years.
Yep.
And I got the better end of the bargain.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah. So are you New Orleans or Louisiana? Is that your? Yeah, raised there.
Yes, I'm from New Orleans, and Hollykem's from a town that's actually south of New Orleans, if you can believe there's a south of New Orleans, called Thibodeau.
Yeah. I'm a good Cajun girl, and my stepfather's last name was close to yours, but he was a Rogers. Yeah, from Mississippi, but my father and my mother are both from Louisiana. Yes. So I'm a Louisiana girl, born and bred, Cajun woman.
Yeah. That's neat. Visited, been down in the area a few times, but it's been a little while now. But anyway, really neat. So why don't we just start out with your story a little bit? Who wants to go first and tell me a little bit about your background and what led you into the work that you're doing today?
Sure. Well, I am sober 42 years. January 10th of 83, I've been sober. I got sober at 22 years old. I was a drug addict and an alcoholic. And through that, and I was also a convicted felon at 19. And through that process of, realizing what's interesting is that you talked about your doing interventions. My mother did an intervention on my stepfather. And when I was 21 years old, I was already married, still using. And, we were part of that because I grew up with my stepfather since I was 6 years old. And through that intervention, we used to go to Family Week, and we all went to Family Week. 17 family members went to this Family Week. That tells you how much power my stepfather had in our family at the time. And so through that, I learned about tolerance and what happens to you. So that was in May of 82. And by January of 83, I had realized that I was not going to live long, which I already knew that. I knew I wouldn't make it past 25. But I'm looking, I just turned 22 years old in November, and I'm like, okay, is this really how I want to go down? So through that process, I started my journey and detoxed myself and started going to 12-step meetings and never quit working on myself since then. So, been sober from drugs and alcohol for 42 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. It's been a journey.
Yeah.
How about you, Dr. Dean?
Well, I was late teenage years. My father's drinking had escalated. New Orleans has a very lax attitude towards alcohol, and it really wasn't an issue in my younger years. But as I got later in my teenage years, my father's drinking escalated. And the same with Hollykem, which you were talking about. And I love the name of your show, When God Intervenes. We had an absolute God intervention. And it was all based around, the long short of it is that we did an intervention on my father the day after Mardi Gras. You always do the day after a blowout, right? And he had a moment of openness and insight and receptivity. It was really a divine setup that would happen. And he went to treatment, and what do I know? I need help. What do I need to do? We had his bags packed, drove him across the lake, and 30 days at a treatment center on the North Shore of New Orleans. And he's been sober ever since. And thank God, I love my dad for that courageous decision and for his fortitude. He's 87 now, still sober, still helping people, still healthy, and
awesome.
still committed to his recovery. Just extraordinary man. But at that time, as you know, perhaps, and everybody knows, that when you're dealing with addiction in a family, it just doesn't affect the person that's suffering. It affects everybody in the family system.
That's right. Yep.
So back in those days, the whole family would go to the third week of treatment for the full week. It was called Family Week.
Yeah.
And so we were invited to go from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m, Monday through Friday, to support him in his recovery. And so we did. And I tell you, I was so blown away by that whole process. I could see early signs of addiction in me. I could see the impact of how it had on the way I communicate, how I disconnected to my emotions, how I have a hard time trusting. And there's a lot of issues that came from that. And the message was I was going there to help my father, and it was really an intervention on me. And so that really plunged me on a journey of self-growth and commitment. Just as he had made a commitment to stay sober, I was making a commitment to do what I had to do to come out of the effects of addiction. And so I was on that journey for really in a very focused way for a number of years. And so had Hollykem been on that journey, we didn't know each other. But when we met, we had both probably 3, 4, you further along than me, 5 years down the road. And I tell you, it made our relationship easy.
Yeah.
I mean, marriage is tough, but the problems that we've had haven't been within the relationship. There have been things that we've had to deal outside the relationship. But I attribute that to years and years of being willing to look at ourselves, to own our self-destructive behavior, to be willing to put our woundedness out on a table and ask for the Lord to heal it, to to practice the principles that Jesus taught of forgiveness and repentance, and taking self-responsibility, and all those things that are, so deeply entrenched in Christianity that you can find in the 12 steps. We really were both working that very hard. And God, the Lord did a miraculous change in me and Hollykem. And so when we got together, our life work became, let's help others. Let's help others do the same. And has led us down a variety of paths to do that.
Man, that's great. That's great. I don't want to get too far into my story here. I want to stay focused on you, but you're making me think of a couple of things of where there's some overlap here, a little bit in that. For me, I had to do my own work, but I didn't understand that. I did not understand that until after my son died. I mean, I'd started figuring it out before he died a little bit, but after he died is really when I was like, okay, I need to change. And that's one of my big messages to parents is that you don't have any control over your child who's battling addiction, particularly adult children. And you're really getting out of your lane if you're trying to control them. And it's mostly those attempts to control are out of fear. You're on your own spiritual journey. And when you have an opportunity here to take that pain, let that pain motivate you to really do a deep dive and look at the things that you can work on, because we all have something that we can work on that we need to, we need to get right with God on. And I mean, we're all born into this broken world. We all bring things with us. We have, I'm sure, you've seen it yourselves and you've probably experienced it yourselves. And we all have some kind of, you want to call it trauma, that we bring into relationships with us. And so it affects the relationships and it affects our relationship with God. And so there's always work that we need to do on ourselves. And I like what you were saying about, you had already been doing a lot of that. You had already been turning inward and looking inward and trying to, grow spiritually when you met each other. And so, it's great. It's great that you were already on that journey separately, and now you're merged together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what you're talking about is that a lot of times the addict, the alcoholic, the person that has the presenting problem, that we're intervening on or that needs to go to treatment, they're, out of control, obviously, or you wouldn't be doing it. And, has pushed the limits so much that, we've got to stop them because it's dangerous. And when, everything is focused on that, right? And trying to get that thing, dealt with, and not understanding that thing, not the person, but that thing has been controlling everyone in the family, including the addict, right? Yeah. So everybody's being controlled and not understanding it. So, and I always tell people, like, I was a board certified substance abuse counselor for, 20, 30 years, a long, long time. And in that process, it's like, I'm a recovering drug addict and alcoholic, and I had to go to school for 3 years to learn to teach it. So, it's not like, I'm supposed to know this, like we get a handbook one day when we have a baby and go, oh, well, your kid might be an addict. You might want to study this. It's like, no, it's like, it's not supposed to happen, but it does happen, that we do end up suffering with different things. And as we're talking about this one, so, in that process of understanding that anything that hurts me needs attention. And anything that, if it was done on purpose or not, it still needs attention.
Yeah.
And if you have a family member, if that is suffering, you're hurting. So, it deserves attention. It deserves the deepness. And then what else does that bring up? I mean, I was thinking about when you were saying trauma, it's like, I haven't met anybody that only has one, right. It's like we all have a bunch of things because things matter to us.
Right.
If it doesn't matter to you, there's not a trauma, but if it matters to you, it's going to hurt you and it's going to be traumatic.
What I love about one of the things I discovered when I started working with Hollykem, and she was kind of showing me the way she works, and that's what we really integrated in our book, But what we discovered was that we all have our own wounding, or we're all dealing with stress on different levels, and the way we cope with it is different. Now, somebody's coping behavior can lead to become an addiction, and they're sedating life through the addiction. But another person's coping behavior could be through overworking. Another person's can be through unhealthy relationship with food. Another person can be hyper religiosity. I'm not talking about healthy spirituality or healthy religious practices. And and not all of those fit the category of addiction, but all of them fit the category of coping behaviors that can become self-destructive.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do when we work with a individual or families. We say, we're not saying everybody's an addict.
No.
But we're all saying that because you're a human being and you live in a broken world and you've been hurt by certain things, that you've coped with those. And some of those coping behaviors become self-destructive. And we want you to identify and actually name those. And we're going to help you contain those so that you can learn to put those on the side so that you can become the person who God destined you to be. And it's really easy to see when the person is shooting heroin. Okay, I can understand that's an unhealthy behavior.
Right.
But for the
socially unacceptable.
But for the medical doctor who can't quit working and is neglecting his child and his wife, it's a lot harder to see that as a coping behavior because there's a lot more accolades and success that goes with it. But yet it can become self-destructive if it's out of control.
Right. Yeah, I see. It's very typical that I see with parents. Like I mentioned earlier, attempts to control out of fear it just goes over the top. It gets misplaced. I mean, they love their children, and they want to do what's best, but then it becomes at some point it becomes dysfunctional. It becomes it just goes over the top. I'm sure you get what I'm saying here.
Yeah, I mean, I
Definitely.
always say it's admirable for you to love your child. The question is not that you love your child; it's how you're loving them. And so the how can become a place where it actually hurts them.
Yeah.
Because I always use an example. If my brother has a gambling problem, which he doesn't, but if he did, and he came to me and he said, "Can I borrow $1,000? I need to keep my lights on and pay my house note." Well, the first thing I would say is, well, what happened with your money?
Right.
And if he said, well, that's none of your business, I would say, well, it's not my business, but if you ask him for $1,000, it's suddenly become my business.
Right.
So if I determine that he's actually in the throes of a gambling and addiction, and he's going to use his money to go to the casino, then the most loving thing I can do to him is say, listen, I'll pick you up and have a meal with you and spend time with you, but I can't give you $1,000.
Right.
Because some people would say, well, the most loving thing to do is to give him $1,000 so he can pay his electric bill and he can pay his house note and his house. I said, but no, what if I give him $1,000 and he goes to the casino and he spends it, and now he's feeling guilty. I'm angry with him. I'm calling him. He's ducking my calls. He won't look me in the eye. And actually, because I gave him $1,000, I ended up hurting our relationship. Yet, if I didn't give him $1,000 and I said, listen, I'll spend time with you. I'll bring you to treatment. I'll get you some help. I can't give you $1,000. Then I'm preserving the integrity of the relationship. And so both of those, giving it and not giving it, could both be seen as a loving thing to do for the brother that I love.
Right.
But how I'm doing it is the question.
Right.
And one would be, as you were saying, would be over the top. It would be doing something that's actually facilitating his self-destruction.
Yeah.
The other would be intervening in a loving way that could potentially open up a door to get help. Or when it does open, he knows where he can come.
Yeah, I see parents sometimes get stuck kind of in a loop because, and then their addicted loved one gets stuck in a loop too because they, sometimes they can, this is how bad I've seen it get, where they know the right thing to do and they cannot muster up the courage to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That addiction that has their child in its grips is manipulating them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the heat of the moment, they cannot sometimes find the courage to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's really nuanced. The communication can be really nuanced. Like, and then this has come up with me several times recently in talking to parents where they'll say, "Well, I just can't. I can't
Mm-hmm.
do that, or I can't give you the money, or I can't do this anymore." And their child has heard that dozens of times, and they have learned that doesn't mean anything really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard for them to say, "I will not do that anymore because it is harming you for me to give you this money," because they know that it's going to elicit a reaction, a strong
Mm-hmm.
reaction from that addiction that's going to be very confrontational,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes very angry,
Mm-hmm.
and they're fearing that they may lose the relationship,
Mm-hmm.
or their child. They may feel. I think there's a lot of fear that if we have an intervention, that my child may they're not going to do well with that, or if I
Yes.
set firm boundaries, my
Mm-hmm.
child may not respond to that well, and then I will feel guilty if anything
Mm-hmm.
bad happens to them.
Yeah.
Can you speak to
Well, I
that for a
can.
minute?
Yeah. Can I ever? Well, my mom and my stepdad, which I grew up with since I was 6, I have a brother that is 8 years younger than me. And when I went to them for help, they said, you pretended you were sober for a while. You've been lying. Go back to your husband, do what you got to do. But, we're not going to help you. So there was no enabling. And I got sober, and I've been sober for 42 years. They sent my brother to treatment when he was 16 years old. And my brother went to over 60 treatment centers. And until my dad died and my mother moved out of town, my brother is now 57. He's got 2 years sobriety at 55 years old. And he absolutely ruined and physically stole everything they had. And they enabled him so much that they were divorced and married twice and ended up with nothing left, no money. And my mom lives in an apartment, and my stepdad died in a nursing home. So can I tell you what enabling does? It will destroy a family. And they gave him money. My mom still gives him money. And she has none to give. And he's disabled, which he's legally blind, but that has nothing to do with it. But he gets more money than her, and he doesn't pay a bill. He's enabled by his ex-wife. He lives in the house with her. He just, he is sober right now. Praise God in the name of Jesus. He knows the word of God. He can quote the Bible like anybody. You can't, when he would go to jail, he wouldn't go to jail often. Okay. Because they never would press charges. I'm the only one that would do something. And in that, I lost my relationship with my parents because I was the hard one. But, you got to do what you got to do. I wasn't putting nails in his coffin for me. And in that, but I'm the one that he respects, because I'm the one that said no all the time. And he knew, like they would say, well, something's really wrong with him. Yeah, he's a manipulative addict. That's what's wrong with him. And you always fall for it. And, they could not do it. They couldn't, they would not, and they could not. And they knew better. They've been in recovery like before me. So, they couldn't do it. And he lost his life for it, and he cannot live alone at 57 years old. He's terrified. He can't work. He's a child. And, it's sad. It's really sad. I'm great. Now he can preach the word. He knows the word of God, but because his history has been he doesn't have a long, he would come out, get sober, and he'd preach the word. He'd help people get sober. He'd bring them to meetings. He'd bring them to God. He'd, lay hands on them, everything. But he'd go back out and he'd steal from everybody. So, they're still in recovery. So in that, he's got to have some serious time because, my parents' word was not their word. And then his word doesn't stand. But in the name of Jesus, it will continue to, he'll continue to stay sober because there's not really any enablers besides they let him live in the, my sister-in-law lets him live in the house. Because my parents don't live here and his dad died, he has a chance of having a better life.
Right.
Which is really sad.
Wait, the point being is that once the enablers were gone or out of town,
yes,
he got sober.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the message all along.
Yeah.
And I remember Hollykem telling me, look, Dean, you need to love them enough to tell them the truth, even if it risks the relationship.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow, but that is, look, we're not called to be accepted and loved by them. We're called to love them.
Yes.
And sometimes loving them means putting everything at risk.
Yeah.
And that's really, as you talking, like that's the biggest challenge usually for a parent,
right?
Is to love them enough to be able to risk the relationship.
Yeah.
But you don't have one anyway.
What's that?
But
you don't really have a quality
relationship anyway.
Right.
Because they're not there. The child that you're in love with, the child that's so precious to you is lost. But
they're still in there somewhere.
They're in there. But they're lost.
You're not dealing with them.
No, you're not dealing with them. And
that's right.
Yeah. So then you're so confused because it's like, this is my child, but this is not my child. My child has been consumed by this sickness, by this disease, this ugliness. And it's like you're trying to reach in and get them, but who you're working with is not them.
Yeah, I always say when you're working with someone or you're intervening, I said the rules are, you need to be direct, you need to be honest, and you need to be loving.
Yes.
And why that's so hard is because oftentimes they're being indirect, dishonest, and angry. So you have to shift. It's like, okay, I need to learn to be direct. I need to learn to be honest and not angry. No, direct, honest, and loving. And that's really the only thing that gets through in terms of an intervention. If the community of people can really master being those three things, direct, honest, and loving, I've found like over 95% of the time, the person goes directly to treatment if it's done and they're all trained. I mean, it's a very, very high percentage. And it's because that is the thing that gets through. And, that's certainly from scriptures, love cast out all fear. With God, all things are possible. But it's when we engage in his ways of handling things, we can break anything. And I think what's also important for parents to hear is that, yes, if you look at it spiritually, addiction is a spirit.
Yeah.
It's a very strong spirit, but it's not stronger than God's spirit. No. It's not even close. Right. It's not a lion fighting a lion. It's an elephant fighting a flea.
Yeah.
There's no comparison. And so I have to take hold that we get intimidated as if this is a stronger power than the power that we're carrying, that we're dealing with. And it's not. It's not.
That's right.
We need to claim the authority that we have in partnering with God and knowing that his spirit is greater than any other spirit. I remember doing an intervention one time and I broke every rule in the book. I was at this Methodist church and this older couple came up to me and they said, can you help us? And I was actually an associate pastor at the time. And I said, well, what's up? She says, we think our son has drug problems. I said, well, what gives you that indication? Well, he moved back home. He doesn't have any more money. he's staying up all night and sleeping during the day. He's not holding a job.
And he's in his what? How old was he?
He's in his late 30s,
Right.
mid-30s.
He's not 15.
We think he might. I said, I'll be over at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, I mean, as you know, being an interventionist, like I'm breaking every rule.
Right.
I'm not doing any training. I'm not doing any coaching. But I just felt an unction on the inside to do that. So I go over and I'm praying the whole time. And I'm saying, Lord, there's nothing more powerful than you. In your name, whatever spirit's inflicting this young man, I command it off of him. I command your spirit to reign, to be with, you know, I was just in this really intoxicating, empowering prayer. And I get in there and they're sitting on the sofa. And I said, well, we'll get your son. And so the mother goes upstairs. She comes downstairs shaking his head. She said, under no circumstances is he coming down, he said. So the dad goes, let me try. So he goes upstairs and he comes down shaking his head. Under no circumstances is he coming down. So they said, let us both go try. So they go upstairs and they come back downstairs and they're both shaking their head like, he's not coming downstairs. Now, while they went that second time, I was like praying really, you know, I was just, Lord, you with me. You're stronger than whatever is destroying this young man and this and that and this and that. It was really taking authority. So when they came downstairs, I did something that I would never do. I've never met this guy. I had this unction, go upstairs and tell him to come downstairs. So I'm like, oh. So I walked up the stairs. I knocked on his door and I opened it. And he's looking at me with big eyes. I said, my name's Dean. And I'd like you to come downstairs to talk to us just for a few minutes. And if not, we'll come upstairs and talk with you. Your choice. So he says, I'll be down, you know. So the parents are like downstairs shaking in there on the sofa. But he came downstairs. He shook my hand, sat down, and I just started talking to him. And within 10 minutes, he was ready to go to treatment. And the very spirit of addiction, that resistant, angry, belligerent, was off of him. I mean, he came downstairs and it was off of him. And their jaw dropped. He was receptive. My jaw dropped, and we brought him to treatment. And what I'm saying though is that was an example. I don't advocate doing it like that,
Right.
But
right,
unless you really feel an unction, but
Right.
but the fact is that God's spirit is so much more powerful than the afflicting spirit that's trying to destroy. And we need to understand that. We need to take our authority. We need to claim it. We need to start having faith that that's the truth, because it is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I just made a video on social media that's something along those same lines. And Jesus loved people enough to tell them the truth.
Yeah.
And you know, you have to really check your motives on this. You know what I mean? Like when we're confronting someone in love, we have to make sure that our motives are pure. But we get ourselves out of the way, and sometimes there's a right time and a right way to present someone with the truth that you know you're going to get pushback on, right? Or that they're maybe not going to respond well to. But that's where that courage, you know, they have to muster up the courage. And God can give you the courage to do that through the Holy Spirit, to speak the truth in love and stand firm in that. And, you know, I think so many people get this idea that, you know, loving somebody means that you can't ever be confrontational, you know, that you can't ever stand on the truth, or it's the other way, you know. And look, I've been like that a good portion of my life where, you know, I had to learn to change where, you know, I was kind of my personality default is non-confrontational, you know, but then I would get to the point where I'm like, by the time I was ready to confront someone, I was like, you know, now I'm really angry, right? And you're going to get everything with both barrels. And neither one of those ways is right.
Right.
You know, it's like you have to find that spot that sweet spot where you can confront in love but still be willing to stand on the truth and tell them the truth, even when you know it, but you can do that without being ugly. You don't have to be
Right.
ugly,
Right.
but you have to be firm
Yeah.
in delivering it.
I think I love what you're saying, and the order is real important. You know, in Scripture it says that Jesus is the Word, right? And he was full of grace and full of truth.
Mm.
And, you know, grace is when you have an unconditional acceptance of where a person is and treating them with dignity and respect, even when they don't deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. So if somebody spit in my face and I gracefully responded, but didn't do it in a retaliatory way, and you were looking, you might say, wow, you handled that gracefully. Like I treated this person with dignity and respect, even when they didn't deserve to be treated. And so grace is very important. If you notice Jesus in the Gospels, he always led with grace. And then he would speak truth. If you reverse the order, it doesn't work as well.
Right.
I speak the truth, and if you accept my truth, then I'll extend grace to you.
Right.
That's the opposite.
Right, yeah.
So if I'm late every day, and Hollykem says, you're inconsiderate, narcissistic jerk, you're always running late and you disrupt them. It may be absolutely true, but it's not going to have too much of an impact on me.
It's not going to land well,
But if
doesn't
she
give
says
you the results that you want, right?
As the pilot would say, it's not going to land well.
But
he would know.
He would know.
Yes.
Now, if she said, when I came home late, honey, you know, we really want you here for dinner. And it works so well. And it's so important for me to have you when we eat dinner together. And it makes things run so much more smoother. And I miss you when you're not here. Can you work on not being late? You've been late every day this week. All of a sudden, she led with grace. And I'm like a dog waiting for a treat. You know? Okay, anything else? And I think it's really key that the order is very important. When he dealt with the woman who was thrown at his feet, who had committed adultery, and she was to be stoned, he said, whoever hasn't sinned, throw the first stone. They all dropped their rocks and walked away. But he turned to her and he said, woman, do they not condemn you? And she said, no. And he said, neither do I.
That's right. Yeah.
Grace.
Yeah.
And then he said, go and don't do this anymore.
That's
Spoke
right,
the truth. So what we aspire to, especially if we're dealing with someone who's suffering, if we just are graceful and we don't speak the truth, then we enable, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So we need to lead with grace, and then we speak the truth. And that's what brings maximizes the chances of bringing conviction.
Yeah.
This is much more this is not on as much of a spiritual level, but I use a similar concept in that just in communication in general, when I'm talking to people a lot of times, training families, because so if you have something like that, you have to say, I call it the sandwich method. You start out with a compliment, or you say something nice, and then you deliver. It has to be genuine. You can't make it up. But if you can pay a genuine compliment or something to start the conversation out like that, and then you deliver the things that you have to deliver, and then you wrap it at the end with another, something nice to say. It's a lot smoother, and it's not quite what you're saying. It's not quite on the same level as what you're saying, but it's a similar concept.
Well, and coming from an addict point of view, one of the things that parents need to hear, or spouses, is that we know we're addicts. We know we're alcoholics.
Yeah.
We may not tell it to you. We may not own it. Because that's part of the sickness, is the denial. But the truth is, you know it and I know it, that I'm suffering. And I'm suffering with something that I have no power over. And, the only people that have to control alcohol and drugs is an addict. and an alcoholic. Normal people don't think about, you know what, I'm only going to have 3 drinks today. Normal people don't do that. Normal people go somewhere and someone says, would you like a drink? They say yes or no. And that's it. They're not thinking about, if I hurry up and drink this one, I can get another one before my wife sees it, or I can hurry up before my daddy sees me and I can get 4 down. They don't do that. Normal people just have a drink, or they don't, or they have one and they never finish it, or, it's not like that where, where someone that has alcoholism and is suffering, they're thinking about, okay, well, this event, I'm only going to have 2. And they only have 2. And they go, well, see, I don't have a problem to the world, right? Or they're trying to convince themselves. But while they're only having 2, they're watching everybody else drink and they're thinking, I wish this person would just be quiet because I can't handle this anymore. I got to go home. Because see, they've agreed to only have 2 at that event. But if they could go home, they didn't agree that they wouldn't have another one later. To themselves. Like, this is internal. So it's like, we know we have, we know we have it, but we're not going to open up to to the world about that because we're still controlling it. But the truth is, if I'm controlling it, it's controlling me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's very similar to something I talk about a lot of times. I talk about ambiguity, where, a person really, a lot of times they're in a space where they know they have a problem. They want to do something about it. Sometimes they're almost screaming for help, but it's back and forth. And the internal dialogue is back and forth. They want help, but then the addiction is like, no, you know what that means, right? And look, I can't speak from a place of, I've never been there. So I'm just telling you from a place of being on the outside, observing people. And please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this.
No. You're right. I mean, we wrote a whole book on that. Right. That's our whole book. Our whole book is
okay.
That's our book. Is we call it The Voices Within: A Roadmap to the Soul. And it's like, there's your true self, who you really, really are, and who God intended you to be, and who you were born. And then there's a part of us that is very wounded in life, and there was no way for it to get all the attention and love that it needed for that particular trauma or wound to melt, right? So it just gets stuck in us. It's not nobody's fault. It just happens, right? So through enough rocks, we get enough of those rocks in us, we all try to figure out a way to make those rocks quiet. Some of us become workaholics. Some of us become cleanaholics. Some of us become worryaholics. Some of us become all kind of aholics. And then the ones of us that go across the line and become drug addicts and alcoholics, then that voice is very loud, but it's very loud in all of us. And it says, stop, like, I need a drink. I need this. I need this. So then when you're confronted with stopping those things, because now they've caused much destruction internally, it's the voices within, right? That one says, I want to get sober. And then there's another voice that, have you lost your mind? This has always worked. It will work. And I'm not giving it up. So what I always say, if the true self is happy, the protector part of us that wants to stop the pain is not going to be happy. If my protector is happy, getting drunk, getting high, sedating, worrying, whatever, my true self is not happy. So the only way to have true inner peace is to know the different parts and to know who's going to get the power here, who's really going to win here. And the goal is if you have a 4-year-old that walks in your living room and all of us are sitting there and he's got a butcher knife, and what are you going to do? Are you going to take the butcher knife away, or are you going to leave him have it? Everybody's like, no, I'm taking the butcher knife away. Well, what's he going to do? He's going to scream and cry because he wants the butcher knife, right? So do we give him back the butcher knife because he's throwing a fit? And it's like, that's how I saw it for myself. It's like, Hollykem, are you going to give yourself the butcher knife so you can stab yourself to death until you die this tragic death? Or are you going to let this part of you scream and you're going to take control and say, no, until the scream becomes quieter, and then the pain comes, and then I love the pain until one day those things are whispers and not screams anymore.
Wow, that's really good. That's really good. Yeah.
That's how I learned how to get better. And that's how, it's like, but you're so right. It's exactly the same thing. And it's, and for the parent, it looks different, but it's like, different. But right. For the parent, right. He wants to do what?
For the addict, it's I want to get help. I don't want to get help.
Right.
For the parent, it's, I need to tell them the truth, but I don't want to tell them the truth because I don't want to hurt them. So it's the same struggle, but it looks really different.
Really different.
Yeah.
That's right.
Or I need to set these boundaries.
Exactly.
But I can't hold these boundaries. Yeah,
exactly.
Back and
That's
forth.
right.
Yeah.
I'm not. I need to take the butcher knife from him, but I don't want to take the butcher knife because he's gonna throw a fit.
Right.
So I've took that butcher knife before, and he was not nice. And I might have to throw him out of the house if he gets that ugly again. So I don't really want to throw him out of the house because his mother's gonna be really upset with me, and then there's gonna be a fight with me and her. So I can't throw him out of the house. So now I better not take the butcher knife. It becomes all that. So it's the same war. It's just a different.
War. It's like the parents whose child gets a DUI on a Friday night.
Right.
And they call me up and they say, what do I do? And I said, leave him in jail.
Right.
Man, what if he gets beat up by
he won't go back.
Leave him in jail. Just trust me. Leave him in jail. So,
I have a couple of stories about that.
Yeah. But the ones that leave him in jail,
they don't go back.
The kid comes to counseling weeks later and says, man, that night in jail woke me up and I'll never go back to that,
Right.
And then he would have been spared from that if he would have been bailed out. So
that's right. That's right.
The struggle, right?
There's an interventionist friend of mine. His name is Sam Davis. I got to give him credit here because he's a good old boy from Virginia. And, you have your own dialect, if you will.
Yeah.
You've got the New Orleans thing going on. Well, Sam, he's like, let's see, how can I describe Sam? Well, we got an otter problem at our pond up here in Virginia down by the house, But Sam, man, he is a character and he could tell some of the best stories. But old Sam, he's got this saying that don't rob your child of an experience they need to have to be able to grow into the person they were created to be.
That's so good.
And I was like, whoa, man, that is really, really good. And I use that a lot. And, I've kind of adapted it to the story of Moses a little bit, when Moses, when he killed the Egyptian and then he fled to the wilderness. I don't know the whole timeline there because there's some pieces missing, but I know he was in the wilderness for a while. And I think, while he was there, he had an experience and he saw the burning bush while he was there, but he spent some time in the wilderness and God used that time to mold him into the person he needed to be in order to become the leader he needed to be to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Through the wilderness for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
But what if his mom had run out to the wilderness and like, oh, Moses, you must be so hot out here. Let me put a tent up for you. And then the next day she shows up with some water,
Yeah. This is true.
Well, you are so right. And we named our son Moses. And the first chapter in our book is Go Moses. Or the intro is Go Moses because, and we wrote that before we got him. We adopted him, 25 years ago. So our sweet boy is from Cambodia and we get the Moses story. We with you on that is that, you gotta walk through the desert. We write the paradigm that we use is that Egypt represents enslavement and that you have to go to the desert, through the desert in order to get to freedom. The desert in our language is go through our wounds and to learn to love and embrace our wounds. Yeah. And, some get to that place and they want to go back to Egypt. They want to go back to Egypt.
But some go through the desert and they find the promised land. Yeah. Yeah.
And that goes right with the story. Like they're at the Red Sea, right? Yes. And they're all turning on Moses, and they're like, "Hey, you let us out here to die in the desert. Like we could have been back in Egypt, and it wasn't that bad."
Right. At least we had this, whatever this is, right?
Right.
Now they're standing there at the Red Sea with all of the wealth, right? They got all the wealth. They have all the jewels. They have everything. There's 5 million of them, and none of them are ill, okay? They should have all been dead because of what they had to go through. God heals them all. They're all they're wealthy, they're healthy, and all they have to do is have faith and walk, right? And
Right.
but because they had so much fear and they lived in fear for 40 years, a lot of them never made it to the promised land because they just stayed in fear instead of walking the journey and allowing the process to happen, right?
Yeah. Isn't that really one of our biggest enemies is fear,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I use this analogy sometimes about, you can imagine, and so being a pilot, now, first of all, let me just say this. Everybody thinks that there's parachutes in airplanes, and in most airplanes, there's no parachutes, okay? Like if the airplane goes down, you're going down with it. But imagine the airplane's on fire and it's coming down. It's coming out of the sky, and you have a parachute. And you're standing there at the door and you've never jumped out of an airplane before, and you got the parachute strapped on and you're looking out and it's like, man, that's scary. But the airplane's on fire. You know what I mean? It's like, you can't enjoy the glide down to safety if you don't take the step out of the door. You're going to go down with the airplane, or you're going to jump out. There comes a point when sometimes you have to take that leap of faith.
Yeah.
And that's how it feels. And I'm speaking for parents here, but that's how it feels when you're a parent with a child who's battling addiction, who's in the throes of addiction, having to set those hard boundaries and having to communicate those. Sometimes that's what it feels like.
Yes.
You get to this place where you have butterflies in the pit of your stomach, and it just comes and goes, and you're thinking, man, I don't know where they are right now, but wherever they are, it's not good, and then the phone rings and and you get all the worst thoughts, right? When the phone rings, and those are, that's fear. That's operating in fear, and we have to learn how to overcome that and how to have enough faith. And faith is an action word. It's about taking steps, like, what do I have control over? What has God put in my life, to put in my lane to control, that I can take some action on? If it's just picking up your Bible and reading it,
right,
or praying, or taking some kind of action that God leads you to take,
right.
Rather than being paralyzed with fear and just standing there in the door of the airplane while it's on fire,
Yeah.
It's so true. And in the scripture, God did not give us the spirit of fear.
That's right.
But he gave us the spirit of love. He gave us the spirit of power, and he gave us the spirit of a sound mind. So if I'm in fear, what it tells you right there is that I feel powerless, is that I'm not in love, and that I cannot think straight.
Yep.
So when you're making decisions out of fear, you're not thinking straight, you're not in love, and you have no power. So it's like, that's the worst time to make a decision.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. And, when I work with someone, I'll often have them locate the voice inside. So if they're consumed by fear, consumed by concern and worry, I say, where in your body is that right now? 90% of the time they'll say it's spinning in my head. Like this voice is just spinning. It's fear, 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 fear. I said, I want you to just stop for a moment. I want you to think about how much you love your children. I want you to think about how much you love your spouse. I want you to think about how much you love your parents, your siblings, the people that you love the most. Think about that right now. And I say, where do you hear that voice? And they'll most often say in their heart. And I say, so simultaneously, like a radio dial, you have both of these circuits going on at the same time. And you're either tuning into that or you're tuning into this. And this is where you're going to hear God. This is where you're going to make your best decisions. This is where you're going to be able to do the most loving thing towards the person that's suffering. And we have to turn the radio dial to that location, or it's going to end up hurting you and hurting them in some way. And so, it's just a very simple thing, because we always have both levels going at the same time. And spiritually, that's when we pray, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to quiet our mind and get centered in our heart, right? Because I always say that, there was never a church named the Sacred Head of Jesus, right? But they've had many churches called the Sacred Heart. Why? Because the heart's the place where God meets us, where he communicates to us. That's the center of our being. And that's where he gives us the steps that we need to do in order to respond to crisis situations.
Yeah. For families that are in the midst of this, sometimes because they've been, it's like I call it the fog of battle. You kind of need, the Bible talks about wise counsel, seeking wise counsel, and sometimes you need that because I think about, like, if I'm a soldier in the middle of a firefight and the bombs are going off around me and everything's happening, like, I can't think straight. I can't see the big picture. I don't know what's going on. But the general's sitting back at the back, and he's looking at a screen, and he's watching everything from the view from above, from the drones and everything, and he can see the whole battlefield. And he can have somebody relay through the radios, hey, you need to move these troops over here and move these troops over there, and he can see the whole strategy. And he's not as just like an interventionist or a coach would be. He's not quite as emotionally attached to the outcome. He can be more objective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, and you being not emotionally attached in the moment, you're attached because you care, but you're not attached in the sense of making those decisions. You're making them from complete knowledge of this is what's best. It's just like a doctor cannot operate on his loved one. He cannot. He's not allowed. Like, I had a good friend that is a heart surgeon, and when my stepfather needed he needed heart surgery, he was scared to do it because he's so close to me. And I'm like, no, I don't want anybody else doing it. And he's like, but if he dies, I don't know what I'm going to do, Hollykem. I said, well, if he dies, he dies. Okay. But if he's in your hands, he has a better chance of living than not dying. So it's not you. If he goes, he goes. I will never blame you. I said, you just be you, as though you're operating on the guy you don't know. You just be you and you'll be fine. And, but his wife called me and said, he is a nervous wreck. He has called me and he's got everybody praying. But, and it wasn't even of his family. It was, just because he was close to me. So that's why exactly what you're saying. We can't see it as well because so much is involved in our connection. So to have an outsider becomes really important. That is a loving, kind person that has a view of this, has knowledge that can guide us through.
Yeah. You gave me an idea for another example that's along the same lines, and I don't want to beat this horse to death, but it's such a good example. When I was learning to fly, I started out with airplanes and got my private pilot's license. And my brother, I have an older brother, he's almost 18 years older than I am, who was a Vietnam helicopter pilot, and he was doing some civilian flight instructing, at this time, and he started out teaching me in the helicopter when I moved to helicopters. He was teaching me, and at some point he moved me to another flight instructor, and I was like, well, that kind of hurts a little bit. Why did he do that? And it's like, I was 17 going on 18 at the time. And he finally told me later, he said, I didn't think it was fair to you for me to be your flight instructor because my expectations of your performance were so far above what they should be and what they would be for any other student. So he said, I thought it would be better for you to go, let one of the other flight instructors finish you up for your helicopter training. And he moved me to that other instructor. And I finished up right on time, just like I should, But he and I have flown together several times over the years since then. And man, I wouldn't. He is the best helicopter pilot I've ever known. Wow. I'm sure there are other people that would argue, but I would put my life in his hands if I needed to go somewhere in a helicopter. I mean, he is really one of the best. So,
wow. Yeah, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
I was thinking about I was
Go
just
ahead.
thinking about
I'm
my
sorry.
stepfather, that he was a Green Beret in Nam. Well, before, he never went to Nam, but in 64 to 67. And, they some tough guys, right? And he could not tell my brother no. Like, this is
And
a
that
tough
goes,
man that can't say no.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
like, so for parents to hear that, like, this is a Green Beret that,
hmm hmm
lived in the jungles for 4 years, and, behind enemy lines, and all that they have to do and be, and, no tags, no nothing, these serious men. And tough. And,
Yeah.
he couldn't say no to my brother.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how much
I've
fear
heard
he had.
similar stories just
Right.
recently. Yeah. 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 Isn't that amazing though?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? And but the things that we go through, we were just talking about the journey earlier,
Hmm.
allowing your child to have that experience. And I would have never chosen the path that I've gone down with losing my son. It was
Yeah.
heartbreaking, and it's been a tough path. Even, it's nothing that I will ever get over.
No.
You don't get over something like that, but
Hmm.
it changed me, and I'm still a work in progress, but um, I wouldn't be who I am today had I
Hmm.
not gone through that, and I wouldn't have met some of the people that I've met. And my life has been enriched in so many interesting ways through some of those people. So, I think the same is true with your child, that you have to
Hmm.
look at it like that as a parent.
Hmm.
Like, you have to allow them to
Hmm.
have that experience, so that they can be molded, so that God
Hmm.
can mold them into that person that help them reach their potential.
Hmm.
And
Well,
I know it's hard. I know it's hard to
mhm.
watch them suffer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, and we, obviously we want to do everything we can to give them the opportunity
Hmm.
to recover, and so we can put those opportunities
Hmm.
out there. But ultimately, it's up to them and God,
Hmm.
Yeah.
to take those steps.
Well,
Chase was at, when you're talking about Louisiana, he went to school he played Division II football, and he was at a school that was it was close to the border of Illinois and Missouri. But
mm,
he took a spring break and went with
mm.
some buddies down in New Orleans for Mardi Gras.
Oh,
And
wow.
then they posted videos online, and he didn't know I was looking at those videos on YouTube, and I was just like, oh my God, it was like, that was scary, because they
Hmm.
were all just completely out of their minds,
Yeah.
when they were making these videos. And but when you were talking about Mardi Gras, kind
Hmm.
of brought that little memory back. And
Hmm.
he dated a girl from that was from St. Francisville.
Oh
Oh.
yeah.
When he went to a military school in the middle of his junior year, he transferred this military school in Virginia and finished up high school there. And she was attending a school that was a boarding school for girls,
Mm.
that was close to that military school, and that's where they met.
Wow.
But yeah, St. Francisville, not too far away.
No, it's beautiful.
No, it's beautiful. It's a
Yeah, isn't that
beautiful
a
little
neat
town.
place? Really
Yeah.
neat place. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to go down there and visit their family some,
Oh,
and really, really pretty area. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and I'm so sorry that you lost your son. I
Yeah.
really am.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
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 And I
Um,
always say our greatest hurts and our greatest secrets are meant to become our greatest treasures.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that, I certainly commend you on your journey, because that's what
Yeah.
you've done, is you've transformed this very, very
Tragic.
painful, tragic event to something to where
Hmm.
you're giving life to others.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
think
thank
that's
you. Thank
that's
you.
what we're called to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're doing it. So I
Yeah.
certainly commend you
And
for
he
that.
lives forever. He lives forever,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
and some people get a monument, some people get this, but you get to help other parents understand the pain that their child is in, and the pain that can happen, and
hmm
that it's worth whatever it takes to have a voice, to do what it takes to help them get the help that is out there, that they deserve it. And so does the parents deserve it. And that no one did anything wrong. And if somebody did, then it'll get rectified. But first we have to get them safe. And, one of the things that a lot of people don't talk about anymore is that in the old days, long time ago, after treatment, you went to a halfway house. You went away from your town and you stayed there. And the people that did that really had a better chance because it allowed the parents time to do some work on themselves and understand because they're hurting because they don't have their child, but it allows them time to get in the 12 steps, to get in the recovery, in the support groups, whatever it is, to learn about the disease and how it affects all of us. And then there becomes a different relationship. So when the child comes back, just like if they're going to college, they go to recovery college, I call it. You would send them, hey, if they get to go to whatever school, you're so happy you send them. Well, you send them to recovery college and then you do your work while they're there because you have the empty nest syndrome and you're crying, you miss them, and then they get to come back and we get to have a different relationship, which is healthier and more connected.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And most people need to understand that first year is key.
Yeah.
That statistically, if you're relapsing in the first year, then your chances of permanent sobriety go way down.
Yeah.
But if you get 1 year under your belt, the statistics, the curve is a lot higher.
Yeah, that's right.
And that, oftentimes, if you think about recovery, the models, it works so much better when there's a weaning down of the external control. So you go to inpatient to back out, that's pretty drastic. But if you go to inpatient to extended care to three-quarter house, and it's different stages, and that's really gives the person the best chance. So you want to do it in stages and try to get that 1 year under your belt, and then long-term sobriety goes up.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. With our story, Chase did go to a halfway house after treatment, and he ended up bouncing around to several different ones. Some of them weren't managed so well, but a lot of it was him too. And the last one he was at, I liked the guy that was managing that house a lot, but he ended up. He got kicked out of that house and he ended up moving back home. I let him move back home and I wasn't doing my work the whole time.
Sure.
And so that was a recipe for disaster, right? Sure. Allowing him to move back in, especially still not understanding addiction, having not done my work. So that's one of the things that I talk to parents about a lot is, number one, rarely is it a good idea for them to move back in at home. Right. And, they do need that. They do need that time. I do agree with you. They need that step down where they're gradually taking on more and more responsibility, to transition into independent adult living. They need that. Yeah. And then the parents need to be doing their work so that they understand how the dynamics need to change, with the relationship. And a good example of that is it's a little bit different, but my youngest son, he was much different. Chase, kids are always like this, right? It seems like siblings a lot of times just polar opposites in terms of certain personality traits. And so Chase was a go along to get along, easygoing. I could kind of lean on him and he would go in a direction that I thought he needed to go. And he would do that just to make dad happy, exactly. Non-confrontational. Justin, the youngest one, man, he would just like push back. He's like, I'm not doing that, Dad. Really stubborn. And so especially, we were already butting heads a little bit, but then after Chase died, all the stress, and we were just and then at some point, I want to say it was maybe in his senior year of high school, probably closer to his senior year, I just had an epiphany, and it's like, you know what? I'm parenting this kid wrong. To start with, he's a different kid. He needs to be parented differently. The other thing is I'm still trying to control. I'm still over into controlling. And I started just backing up and letting him make his own choices, make mistakes. And I'll never forget, like second semester of his freshman year, he calls me one day and he's like, Dad, I got to ask you a question about this situation with this girl. And it wasn't anything serious. It was just a dating thing. But I couldn't believe he was calling me to ask me for advice. But we've had a great relationship ever since. It just totally flipped the relationship when I let go of attempts to control, and allowed him to start running his own life. So yeah, it's interesting how, when that dynamic, the relationship can change to a healthy relationship the way it's supposed to be. It's so much better, and the relationship is so much more rewarding.
Yes. Yes, I love that because it's, just understanding our peace, understanding. And, that's one of the things that we wrote a course on, because we wrote a course on the book and that, roadmap. And in that, it was like taking you through each step, like how do we protect ourselves? And then how do we control? How does our wounds, what are they? And how do they look? And then who is our real true self, and allowing that to come out? And then how do you manage all of that stuff? And then what are your dreams? So it's like bringing them through the process of, I may be in a good place, but there's always more, right? Or maybe I'm stuck in something, or I keep cycling through this, or there's an issue that I'm stuck in. And it's like being able to really work through that so you can become all that is out there. And there's no fear controlling you. Not that you don't have fear, but how do you manage that? And how do you work through that where you can come back and be who you really are?
Yeah. I always use the analogy of, if my son was 4 years old and he threw a rock through my neighbor's window, I go over there and I apologize and I pay for the window. If he's 10 years old, he throws a rock through the window, then him and I go over there together. He apologizes. I'm with them. I pay for the window. If he's 15 years old, throws a rock through the window, I send him over there. He apologizes. He comes back. I pay for the window, but he works off the bill.
Right. Yeah.
He gets to 20 years old, he throws a rock through the window. He goes over there, apologizes, and he pays for the window.
And maybe goes to jail.
So
If he did it on purpose.
Great.
As a parent, it's a disservice to not treat him at the age appropriate level, right?
That's right.
And when a person's suffering with an addiction, we tend to regress to apologizing to the neighbor and paying for their window. It's
That's
like,
right.
it's not our response. We have to just see where we are at this point.
What's interesting that I just saw is that in addiction, we go back to where the child was his true self. And that's where we start parenting from. So like if they're, say 15, okay, and the trajectory started to take them off. They might not be a complete addict, right? But they're pulling away. Something's going on, that we had that relationship. So what happens is we're still parenting at the 15-year-old, but they keep growing in their sickness, right? But we're instead of us growing, saying, no, you're 20. Okay, you're acting 15, but you're 20, and I'm going to treat you at 20, and these are the consequences at a 20-year-old, or these are the consequences at a 30-year-old. But I go back. What parents do is that we go back and we treat 15. It to 15.
Wow!
I just saw that.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, even the other side of it, I was talking to a guy who's been probably a chronic marijuana smoker since he was 18.
Oh, he's 18,
and he's 24 now, and he says he says the other day, I still feel like I'm 18 years old, right? So I don't want to grow up, I'm supposed to stop going into the bars and, running around and being a little more serious. But it's interesting that even he was acknowledging that a part of him stunted and feels like he's at that age. So he would draw that out of his parents, right? To treat him at that age.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
There's the guy that started PAL, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, a peer support group for parents. He talks about something, he calls it delayed emotional growth. When the drugs, sometimes there's a biological, or not biological, but neurological component to it, where the
Definitely.
brain is affected by the introduction of the drugs or the alcohol in it, such a way that the child is not developed.
Yep.
Their brain is the growth is stunted, or they're emotionally
that age.
Emotionally, their growth is stunted.
Yeah.
It's very unattractive when you're 45 and you started drinking at 16, okay? And you're still acting 16.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I always tell
I've
people
seen that.
Right.
Yeah. And but the parents intuitively want to nurture and protect because that's the age they're behaving like.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
Exactly.
As someone on the outside of that looking in goes, something's not right with this.
Something's not right. He's 40 years old and she's getting a bottle for him.
Right.
That's always our question when we're talking about a case or something. And, Dino say something that he's seeing. The parents call it. I'm like, well, how's the son? You're like 44, like, okay, just checking. It's 16. Okay, just checking. How, before I give any answers, I want to know, what are we dealing with? How old's that kid?
Yeah. And I do see I have to run across parents that are just like, they're prisoners in their own home, and they have an adult child that's living in their home using drugs, and they feel like they can't go anywhere, they can't do anything. It's really sad to see that.
They'll steal everything. My brother did.
Yeah.
Destroy.
Why don't we talk about you said you have a course and then you have a book out or a couple of books, or why don't we talk about that a little bit? Sure. Tell the listeners a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, well, everything can be found at our website, ihaveavoice.com. And we have a book called A Roadmap to the Soul. And it's really how to help family members that are struggling with addiction and the addict, how to recover from that. And it's a whole process we walk them through. And for others, it's just it's used real well for couples. And so it's kind of a workbook. It's not just a reading book. Right. It's a real practical application book. But from that, we also have a 4-month intensive online coaching program, which it's for individuals and couples. It's called Transform You. And it's really designed as a course to help you become who you're meant to be and to remove all the blocks that keep you from doing that. So looking at any self-destructive behavior or thoughts that need to be dealt with, looking at wounds that we're still carrying that haven't had a chance to have healing or be resolved. We have a process of working with that. And then creating a vision about where you're being called to go and what God wants from you. And it's a course, and we do coaching twice a week live like this. Hollykem and I do it. And it's really awesome. It is awesome. We've had some couples that have been on the rocks and it's really transformed their relationship. We've had others that have just gotten a whole lot of it as individuals. And we've gone international. So we've had people throughout the United States. Yeah. Now we have Hawaii. We have our first Hong Kong. Yeah. And so we're actually Canada.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. It's a wonderful program. So any of that can be found at ihaveavoice.com.
Okay. So when you're talking about going international, are you you're doing coaching online? Is that what
coaching it's online? It's a whole online program, and then we have our YouTube channel too, which we have hundreds of free videos that helpful to people on all sorts of mental health issues.
Yeah, we have a podcast that we do live coaching on the podcast.
So we have
a podcast. So people come on and they give us a problem, give us an issue, and then we coach them through that. And so that's the podcast.
Yeah, I've heard that referred to as laser coaching.
Laser coaching.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever heard that term or not, but yeah, where you're just coaching on the spot like that live. Yeah, that's a really good way to go. I like that.
I have that for my friend that talks a whole lot and he tells stories and he goes on. And I say, give me the laser. Give me the laser. So it's not laser coaching. It's laser conversation. All right, give me the laser.
Man, I have really enjoyed this conversation with the two of you. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been.
Thank you so much for reaching out. Any other parting advice or comments for the families out there?
I'd say that you're worth doing the work and you're worth doing the intervention, and your child will only grow from it.
Yeah.
And, go for it. As painful as it is, it's more painful to stay in it.
Yeah. And every response is an intervention.
Yes.
And you want to line it up to being direct, honest, and loving. And
I really like that.
When you're in that mode, you're actually intervening. Because if they're in a self-destructive cycle, either you're going to intervene or the authorities are going to intervene, or the grave or the hospital is going to intervene. Yeah. And it might as well be you, because the consequences are different than the others. Yeah.
And ultimately, God is going to intervene.
Yeah,
yes, He is.
Yes. How could I forget?
Guy.
How could I forget? Yes.
No, that's great. That's a perfect segue. And you two are so good together as a couple too on the interviews. Like, you just complement each other perfectly. And so I've just taken notice of that as we've been talking. It's been back and forth, really good conversation. So thank you again. I appreciate you being here. And I look forward to having more conversations with you soon.
Oh,
sounds great.
So much,
God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to When God Intervenes. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more families in need of hope and healing. For more resources and support, visit our website at thefamilyrecovery.